Bum, bum, bum. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to 7 Days Deep Dives. I'm not really sure what I'm calling this series. All I know is this particular episode is going to be coming out of order because I had a bit of an episode yesterday where I felt really bad, and this is like the quickest recording I can get done, and it's been on my list for a little while. What would you say if I told you in 7 days there's absolutely zero risk of you ever becoming a zombie? Wouldn't believe me, would you? I have proof. But first, a word from our sponsor. I bet you were waiting for an actual sponsor. It's not going to happen. If you actually want to support the channel, just give me a like, a subscribe, maybe boost the video by sharing or something like that, coming on over to my other channels. Links are all down in the description. I do have a VODs channel which does my live streams. I also do clips over there on that channel. And I also have a gardening channel which you would be happy to know only gets a video about once a month, if that. Giving you guys an overview of what it is I'm doing in my garden because it just does not fit on this channel. So maybe check those guys out. Now, back to the video. Let me go get it. This is a dumb bit. Okay, let's move on with it. Okay. How many of you guys have actually gotten an infection in 7 days and allowed it to do its thing? Just completely let it take over. How many times have you done that? Not very many people have. I have done this. It was one of the first experiments I did in the game was to allow my infection to go full send. And what happens? Well, as your zombie infection continues in 7 days, you deal with a lot of side effects, mostly having to do with stamina, health, mostly having to do with stamina. It gets to the point where your character has a hard time dealing with much of anything and fighting for its life. But after the infection gets so far, your character just simply dies, falls over and dies. Even in multiplayer, you can see this. Even if your character falls out and some friend comes up and walks up next to you and says, "Hey, I'll sit here and collect all of your stuff or whatever after you're gone," you're like, "Cool beans." And then your character just dies. How many of you have actually gotten mauled by a group of zombies? Does your character get up afterwards and start walking around with all of your gear on its back? No. As a matter of fact, do you, at any point in this game, see someone who has survived the zombie apocalypse, gone out, harvested a whole bunch of stuff, found containers to put their loot into, backpacks on their back, sleeping bag on their back, maybe a bit of gear that they actually harvested somewhere, obviously not clothing because we don't have those right now for reasons. That doesn't exist. Those zombies don't exist. As in, people who survived the initial apocalypse went out and started the thing of survival and somehow or another died, whether they died of malnutrition, died of zombie mauling, whether or not they tripped over, fell into a bush and got a scratch on their arm and got an infection of some sort. Those guys never died and turned into a zombie. Which leads me to think that the zombie apocalypse has actually stopped spreading. There was one bout of zombies. All of the zombies you're facing right now in your game on your 7th day, whatever it is, those were all created at the same time. How on earth did I arrive at this conclusion? Well, first off, the knowledge that these guys were not created afterwards. There are no people who have guns slung over their shoulders, no backpacks on their backs. The fact that those guys do not exist, meaning all of these guys existed prior to survival. Survival, apocalypse, whatever. The fact that whenever your character dies in any form, you do not ever see your character rise back up. Whenever you're in a multiplayer scenario, you never see your friend rise back up. But you might be asking, but then why on earth do we get an infection? What is with the infection situation? Because I thought we were getting the zombie infection and we have to cure it before we die. You're correct, but infections don't necessarily mean zombie infection. An infection could be anything. Anything. In an apocalypse situation, anything could cause an infection. You could look at rust and get an infection. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but let's just go ahead and acknowledge the fact the buildings that we're looking through, the areas that we're passing by, none of those guys are even remotely safe. And by safe, I mean right now, with the way things are, especially in our country, I know not every country is the same way, but in our country, there's a lot of areas that are sterilized to the point of if you live in this sterilized environment and then you go out into a regular environment, you're going to get sick. That was one of the biggest things that I think people had issues with whenever it came to widespread illnesses that exist on a yearly basis is in a lot of cases, if you get whatever that yearly thing may be, you'll get a lesser version of it and you'll be okay for the rest of the year. Well, what happens whenever you go from the sterile environment and you're dropped into the zombie apocalypse, and you're no longer in sterile environments? Things aren't constantly being cleaned and sanitized. Your character's not constantly bathing. It's probably very hard to find soap. As a matter of fact, I don't recall seeing soap in any of my loot boxes at all. Ever. So our character never sanitizes. We put a first aid bandage on there. What does that mean exactly? Is it a sterile bandage? Is it a first aid bandage? Did we just put some aloe on it? What's on the first aid bandage? Maybe the kit existed prior to the zombie apocalypse, but I can guarantee before the apocalypse, those kits were not made to fight a zombie apocalypse. They were just basic first aid kits. So, what is our character getting sick with whenever we do, in fact, get an infection? Anything. Anything. How many people who are adults have had a tooth get infected? Or a wisdom tooth get infected? Or a cut on their hand get infected? Heck, those of us that have worked factory jobs, or heck, even if you go in for nursing, if you go into school for nursing, they're the first thing that they say, get a tetanus shot. Anything. And in the zombie apocalypse, any infection could potentially kill you. And the reason why I say this is let's dig a little bit deeper, just a little bit deeper. We'll get to the stuff that's on the screen in just a second because it gets a little bit juicier than this. But think about it this way. Put ourselves into 2035 when the zombie apocalypse is rampant. It's everywhere. The last real I don't know, let's just go for radio because maybe TV is not necessarily working anymore or it's not keeping up with everything. The last radio call that we heard was there is a lab that is working on a cure right now for the zombie apocalypse that is just running rampant. It's everywhere. We don't know how to stop it. We don't know what to do. Things are coming back. Close your eyes and think about that. Right there and then, no medicine existed to fight the zombies. The world would not have fallen if a cure was actually found, which means the pills that our character is finding and the honey that we're finding inside the stumps did not cure the zombie apocalypse. If it had, there would have been no need for the zombie apocalypse to take over. It would not have gotten as far as it was if it was as simple as taking a regular antibiotic or popping some honey. Case in point, you can actually look on here because in a lot of holistic remedies, they call for honey because it's antibacterial, antifungal, antibiotic, and it's good for your body to take, especially if it's in its pure form, which is what we assume our character is actually getting out of a stump, is the pure version of it. But there's a lot of limiting factors. The way in which the honey was gathered, where the honey was gathered, the concentration form of the honey, whether or not there's a whole lot of moisture and how the honey was stored. And also in a lot of other things. Inactivity by bodily fluids, varying potency, limited reach for a deep infection, insufficient for systematic infections, and viral and fungal limitations. There are medical grade versions of honey and they are sometimes prescribed for certain things. But ultimately, honey is like a preventative measure rather than a fixer after an infection has already started. So if you get a scratch or something like that, you might put honey over the top of it, and you would also ingest honey to allow your body to have a boost. You would also have other things inside your body that allow you to have a boost. There's something called fire cider that a lot of people who have gardens create every single year before a cold season starts up, and this is some of the ingredients. We can have lemons or oranges. Then we have something that creates a bit of heat and something with a lot of antiviral properties, which would be something similar to cayennes or something similar to that, in that you could probably use most types of peppers, most hot types of peppers. Another thing would be, what is that called? Horseradish. I don't use horseradish in mine, but you could put that in there. Garlic, which is also another antiviral, antibacterial thing. And then the apple cider vinegar, and then a cup of honey. So those are all the things that you would put into an apple cider vinegar, and those are supposed to help prevent a cold or help with lessening the symptoms of it, because whenever you drink it, it allows your sinuses to completely drain, and sinus infections are one of the ways that people get really bad colds and how it turns into bronchitis and stuff, which is the reason why it works. Preventative. And it also helps with a different symptom, not necessarily the cold, a different symptom of what you're dealing with. Just like if you have an infection, in a lot of cases, your body has to fight it, and people tell you do or don't, depending on what the infection is, flu, cold, whatever, on whether or not you should allow your body's temperature to go up because your body is trying to fight the infection. In certain cases, your body's autoimmune system kicking in fights that infection. And in some cases, the autoimmune kicking in can actually be severe enough to where it could cause permanent damage, as in your temperature going up too high. Whenever we think about it in this particular instance, would honey actually fix a zombie virus that they couldn't even figure out how to fix before the apocalypse happened? Not likely. I would say it's probably a lesser infection, which is the reason why it only does at one time 5 and now 10%. We also have an herbal antibiotic, which would be, I don't know, something akin to a mixture of different medicines or different herbs mixed together, compressed, and that you take. And it's also more of a preventative rather than a fix for, because herbs take a long time to work, and you take them more often and more regularly, and they take a lot longer. Whereas if you go to a doctor and get a full-on antibiotic pill, depending on how bad the infection is, you'll probably be taking it for about a week, thereabouts. Now, you might also ask yourself, what about antibiotic-resistant strains of certain things? In which case, if they are resistant, it warrants a longer dosage or a different type of antibiotic. There are several different types. It's not always the same type of antibiotic when you go to the doctor. Different antibiotics work for different things. So, in our apocalypse, we have herbal antibiotics, honey, and just a regular antibiotic. If any of those actually worked for the zombie virus, we already had them. The world already had them before 2035. These are products that probably already existed. The honey being there since whenever. Herbal antibiotics, those things would have existed, and Hagashi would have known about them. And then, of course, the regular standard antibiotics that were sold on the shelf. If any of those actually fixed the zombie apocalypse, it would not have gotten as far as it was, and there would have been no need for further research. They would have licked the problem. So, what our character is fighting whenever we do that is not the zombie apocalypse. It's just a normal everyday infection. And I say normal everyday infection as if it's something light. Right now, if we get an infection of some sort, we can go to a doctor, emergency room, or whatever, get an antibiotic or whatever it is we need, and it's pretty much taken care of in most parts of the world. Not every part of the world, most parts of the world. The zombie virus was not the same thing. They had to search for a cure, search for something to alleviate the symptoms at least, because I would assume in a lot of cases, whatever it was the body was fighting ahead of time, and I'm going to lean heavily on shows like The Walking Dead and things like that, it wasn't necessarily the zombie virus that killed people, it was in fact the symptoms that killed people. But the zombie virus reanimated them. And the zombie virus is no longer there because when your character dies, you are not reanimated. No one is. Nobody who has died since the initial outbreak is reanimated, which tells me the zombie virus was a one and done, probably airborne virus that existed, was likely released, either intentionally or on accident. It quickly spread, and your character is technically immune, has possibly already gone through the initial symptoms and survived the initial symptoms of the outbreak. They did say a flu decimated America. They were worried about it coming to Arizona. Hagashi was already working on it. They had zombies. They were working on zombies. Question though, did Hagashi actually have a hand in creating them? Bigger question, was there a flu outbreak and the symptoms were so severe people were dying? Hagashi got some of these people and attempted to cure the symptoms in some way or another, or at least alleviate and create the zombies by accident, and somehow or another this cure, prematurely released, caused this flu to mutate into the zombie virus for everyone who got the cure. And that's also another reason why maybe instead of our character being immune, they don't actually die from it, because they don't have the antibiotic that actually caused the zombie virus. So let's jump over here to a whole bunch of AI stuff. I like doing this because it's weird to find out what the AI can piece together from random places to try and figure out a way of answering my question. And I'm pretty sure there's probably some FBI agent wondering why I'm so curious about the zombie apocalypse, because I asked him a lot of questions. First off, having to do with the honey, because I hear all the time from the holistic community that honey is like the go-to for antibiotics, when in reality it's actually a very light version, more preventative than anything. So that was the information that I got from this Google search, basically. And by the way, quick disclaimer, don't just go by these AI things. This is all speculation about a video game. Video game. Do not go by these things whenever it comes to like putting together medicines for yourself or your family, or making decisions of extreme importance. Whenever it comes to this, the AI is going to take all of the information that it finds online. It's going to cobble them together and make some assumptions about what it finds. Understand that the assumptions that it is making is also information that is found from humans. Humans are faulty, and therefore the information that you get, the information that goes in, and therefore the answer it could potentially give you could be faulty. We're speculating about a video game, okay, guys? So I went over and asked the Google, theorize rabies making zombies. The reason being is rabies was one of those ones that was always touted to be the potential for creating a zombie outbreak because the symptoms were so similar to the zombie character. In this one, it actually starts talking about the rabies virus, or the Lassa virus, a neurotypical RNA virus, meaning it targets and replicates within the nervous system. It manipulates your behavior. It tells about the transmission. For those of you who saw Old Yeller, this is probably hitting home. Basically, it goes through, and I won't get into reading all of this. You can easily input this information yourself, but basically the zombie virus would mutate within 24 to 48 hours because the rabies virus can only be cured within 24 hours. Basically, there is a medicine, and as long as you think that there is a really good chance that you might have interacted with an animal that has had rabies or does have rabies, if you can get to a doctor's office within 24 hours, it might have even been 12, there's a good chance, not always 100% chance, there's a good chance that they will be able to give you medicine that will help you. After that point, the damage is already done. Which would be the reason why I think in some cases they might have a point whenever they say that the zombie virus could mutate from the rabies virus, because after a certain amount of time, you just really don't have a way to cure it. There's no fix for it. Accelerated incubation. The average incubation period in humans is 30 to 90 days, so it can range from days to years. The slow progression gives time for vaccines to be administered. I think they have found recent vaccines nowadays that I think gives them more time. I'm not sure. I'm not up to date on all of the information. If there was a zombies virus, an incubation of 24 to 48 hours would prevent effective treatment and lead to a swift, unstoppable outbreak. It would also mean that as soon as the zombie virus, in this case rabies, was to hit, the aggression that the person who was inhabited with this would immediately attack other people, and before it was even discovered what was wrong with them, they would have already transmitted it to other people. Sustained. Fictional versus reality. The undead. Rabies victims are not undead. They suffer from a devastating fatal illness. The virus destroys neurons and other critical brain tissue, making the prolonged movement impossible. Basically saying that there is no way that the zombies that exist now are probably the same people who existed back when it started if it was created from rabies, because inherently the characters are not dead. They will eventually decay because of the virus's effect on brain matter and everything else like that. They would slowly die, but they are not technically dead, which means they're not going to be undead for years, you know? Evolutionary dead in. A virus that kills its host too quickly or becomes evolutionary dead in, like a rabies human, cannot spread the virus. Well, it's not biologically successful. The traits required for the zombie plague would not necessarily benefit a virus's long-term survival. Anybody who has ever played, what is the name? Oh, what is the name of that game? Hold on. Games about the spread of zombie viruses. Plague Inc. Anybody who's played Plague Inc., that was the name of it, knows that one of the biggest things you have to do is, if you want the virus to survive, and with most living things, the goal is survival and replication. In a virus's case, its goal is to replicate, same as people, same as animals, same as the fungus that grows up after the rain. The goal is replication. If a zombie virus burns out its host too quickly, it does not transmit, which means there needs to be a longer incubation period. Another thing of, is this bioengineered? Is it real? Was it actually the result of the flu? Was it a result of people trying to fix the flu? Those types of things. No brain eating. Rabies, some reason or another, doesn't give people the craving for brains, so the trope does not work with that one. Some general signs for infection: fever, chills, body aches, fatigue, headache, along localized symptoms such as swollen lymph nodes, skin redness or pain, coughing, and diarrhea. The funny thing is in a lot of cases, these symptoms are the same as a flu symptom, which means they might have called it a flu and it might have just been infection, which a flu is some form of infection too. So I went to Grok yet again, and the first thing I asked it was theorize making rabies into a zombie virus, and it went through a lot of the same thing, the same information. It did it a whole lot deeper. A rare disease to the apocalypse, enhanced transmission, shortened incubation time, behavior manipulation, and artificial engineering. Beyond natural evolution, lab modifications, gain-of-function research could create this threat. Historical lab leaks like the 2003 SARS incidents highlights risk. Engineered rabies might be weaponized as a bioweapon with faster incubation, higher transmittability, and zombie-like symptoms, potentially causing societal collapse in populated regions. One of the biggest concerns is whether or not Hagashi was actually the reason for this outbreak. Not only did they have labs with zombies in them, it's not just people in containers, it is zombies in containers that they were experimenting on, whether they got those after the outbreak or they created them in the lab. And then on the other hand, the Karen Hagashi house has also got zombies in there. Now, not only does she have zombies in there, she also has the mutated zombie, which was, as we know, was created by the introduction of radiation. Question: was that actually created via bombs dropping, which is one theory, or was it created by them attempting to use either geoengineering to create a new type of virus? Was the radiation introduced as a way of attempting a I don't know, a remedy of some sort, kind of like maybe they tried to treat it as if it was a cancer and use radiation to burn it out, but instead it mutated him, something like that. Okay. We're not necessarily going to go into counterpoints. Is there a present day disease that would become a zombie virus outbreak? If there was a present day disease that could become a zombie outbreak, what do you think is most likely? And it actually went to something I had never heard of, which is odd because it's actually very prevalent here, which is CWD, which is what's the full chronic wasting disease, which is often dubbed as zombie deer disease, and it is very close to mad cow disease that existed in, what year was that? The 90s? Yeah, which is a prion disease. And for those of you who don't know what prion disease is, you're not alone. I did not know what a prion disease was. So let's talk about that for a second. It is a rare, fatal neurodivergent disease caused by infectious proteins called prions. Basically, it is a protein that the brain uses, and the folds and mechanics of those, the proteins inside your brain, this mirrors those and takes their place. It basically turns your brain into a sponge. Is essentially it mutates and turns your brain into a sponge. Misfolding, accumulation, damage, spongy in form and appearance, and it gives two examples, which is CJD and CWD. I'm not even sure how you would say this particular word. Creutzfeldt Jacobs disease, and chronic wasting disease. It's the most common human prion disease characterized by rapid dementia and neurological symptoms, and the chronic wasting disease. It affects deer, elk, and moose. And how they are typically transmitted has to do with a lot of different ways. Sporadic, sometimes there's just mutations that happens, that's life. And then there's genetic, you can pass it on from one person to another person, or it's acquired through contaminated meat or exposure through surgical means. So all of these being very odd, could it be potentially some kind of meat that was imported? I theorized in my previous video that this actually started in another country. And the reason why is because Hugh felt the need to patent a couple of apocalypse-style weapons. In my mind, the only reason why you would patent anything is, first off, you had a keen knowledge that something was going on. Secondly, you thought you could make a whole lot of money out of it. Third, you were afraid somebody else was going to make money off of your design. Maybe he actually worked for a company that somehow or another had information and he didn't want the company stealing his design. And fourth, he called it apocalyptic, but he wanted it out there. Maybe he had, in his earlier years, he was a bit more optimistic about their chances of how everything would turn out, and he was hoping on the other side of it that, I don't know, that things would recover, that he would make some money off of it, people would survive, life would continue. I would assume that's probably the reason why he's so grumpy now, is because he realized he was wrong, that things did not continue, that there were very few people, and he probably did not make his millions that he thought he was going to make, and even if he did, it's only good for firewood now. So I would guess Hugh actually has a background with, I'm not really sure that he would actually have a background with Hagashi, but maybe he was in the military. Some sort of secret type of military thing, Navy SEAL, something to that effect. If I'm not mistaken, he actually has awards. Now, I haven't gone back and actually looked at him to figure out which branch he served in or anything else like that, and I don't think the branches are listed the same. But if he was overseas, stationed overseas, and saw what was actually happening, not the stories that were coming over, because we all know media gets manipulated. Things are hyped up that shouldn't be hyped up, and things are, covered up that shouldn't be covered up by media. Now, if there was something serious going on in another country, especially if somehow or another a major U.S. company was involved in it, then maybe there was a reason for them keeping a lid on it. And perhaps because of his experience, he knew what this was. So when he came home, he left whatever service he was in and started coming up with designs to help him survive and help others like him survive. Maybe he actually had a contingent of dudes who left the military with him. We don't know what his whole story is. It's been, maybe 20 years or so since he probably left. So, yeah, I would say probably 20 years since he left, because I don't think he would have made those patents while he was in service. He would have made them once he came home. makes sense in my head, but if he knew that this experimentation was going on, maybe it wasn't released yet, maybe he was just called in to clean up afterwards or something like that. If he knew that this existed and there was a possibility of it being released, escaping, that this was actually the way science was going, maybe he had concerns. That's the reason why I'm going to say it started in another country and somehow he knew. If he was in the military and he was stationed where it was happening, it makes sense. Him coming home and creating some sort of thing for it makes sense. Now, if it was in another country, he knew about it, it came over here, maybe an off-branch overseas of Hagashi, somewhere overseas, was actually experimenting on small groups of people. That could be how they figured out about it. Maybe they were doing all of these things and then they brought them home. At some point, it did make it over here, and at some point, Hagashi actually had samples of real zombies. Not just your basic everyday zombies, they not only had zombies, they had mutated versions of them. They had the white, which is not a normal zombie. They had the mutated, which is not a normal zombie. And they also had some normal things, like there's a freaking boar inside one of those containers. I don't know what they were doing. Were they responsible for Grace? So, that stuff aside, if this was a prion disease, somehow or another, it was affecting people possibly overseas. Maybe they, I don't know, played around with their food system. Maybe they produced meat in a lab and fed it to people. And then just try to find out what happened to them. Seeing as how this is how prion diseases are actually created, this is a very disturbing concept that perhaps Hagashi was either involved in or was trying to clean up from. Let's move on to yet another thing. Let's just close this thing out. Let's go back to Grok. Now, I also asked, along with all of these, it was doing comparisons to other ones. Is there another disease that makes more sense than rabies? And it talks about rabies. It talks about this permafrost zombie virus, the one that they found in the Antarctic. I don't know if you guys have heard about that. Look it up. It's kind of cool, kind of terrifying. They found a dormant virus, and they're just like, yeah, let's take that somewhere and play with it. Yeah, that's the good idea. Then they have the prion diseases that we just talked about. The nodding syndrome, I have not heard about. Seizures, stunted growth, wandering, trance-like states in children's, possibly linked to parasites. Toxoplasmosis, which is behavior altering, e.g. taking risks in hosts, spreading via cat feces, and raw meat. This is also the reason why people put up with cats, by the way. I'm just saying. This is the reason why we deal with them peeing in weird places and knocking all the stuff off our counters, is because of this. Okay, now, for CWD to become a zombie apocalypse, there would have to be a spillover event. A mutation prion variant affects via contaminated meat or environment, perhaps a hunter or butcher. I've heard this conversation happen before. In order for certain mutations to happen, first off, it has to, let's just get into some random conversations that we normally wouldn't talk about on here. I watch a lot of Ryan Oak. If you've never watched his channel, it's really cool. He's got a little bit of a history with studying diseases and stuff like that, and he will take diseases, breaking them down from TV and games, and studying how they could potentially have happened or whatever. In this case, there would be a spillover event where the prion disease would have to mutate to affect a new type of host. Most diseases can only affect the type of host it's been mutated or mutated into affecting. A lot of the diseases that affect livestock or animals as in pets, or wild animals and stuff like that, they don't have the ability to affect a human because our biology is so different from theirs. For instance, we had a dog that had, what do they call that? It's not rabies. What is it? Hang on. A virus that affects dogs that acts like a stomach virus. Parvo, that's what it is. We had an animal that had parvo a long time ago, and the only thing you can do for it is to try and bring it through it. Now, parvo does not pass to humans, just like our stomach virus doesn't pass to a dog. But it's because our biology is so different. But what if something happened to parvo that mutated it to where humans could get it? Or any other number of things. What if somehow or another hairballs were a virus and they mutated and suddenly people got hairballs? Life would suck, right? Um, joking aside, this is how viruses transmit from thing to thing. If you played Plague Inc., you know what it is I'm talking about. It takes a mutation to cause a virus to jump from its original host, whatever that host may be, whether it's dog, bird, pig, cow, whatever. And it has to jump from that host to a new type of host with a completely different biology. From bats to birds to pigs to humans. And it's not that these mutations don't exist, but they are rare that they can happen. Now, not only do you have to have that mutation, aside from it being just a regular disease that could exist or a parasite that could exist or whatever, it has to be able to break the blood-brain barrier that exists in a human, because our brain is slightly isolated from the rest of our blood system in ways that I don't quite understand, but it exists, and that virus has to be able to break through that in order to affect a human. So, another thing would be an incubation spread, as long as asymptomatic, months or years, allows global travel. If you've played Plague Inc., you know what this means. It means you want as few symptoms as possible to start with. A cough here, a sniffle there, whatever it is, to infect as many people as possible before you ramp it up with the really juicy, and I do mean juicy, symptoms that can make it worse and eventually cause the death of the person. Amplification. If human-to-human transmissions evolve via blood or saliva, urban clusters form environmental contamination that sustains it. This is the reason why whenever you are, say, in the military, if you're living in an apartment building, if your children go to school, this is the reason why the flu spreads so quickly, is because there's a lot of people in a small area. In urban areas, a person-to-person transmission would cause this to amplify. In the country, it would slowly spread. In the cities, it would exactly, oh my god, it would actually be the breakout people are expecting from like The Walking Dead or whatever. When it hits one person, another person, someone sneezes, and if it's passing through mucus, that's how it would spread. Societal impact. No treatments, meaning high fatality zombies, staggering, affected, aggressively overwhelming, assisting, especially if mice misdiagnosed early. If for some reason they didn't want to say the Z word, they wanted to call it rabies, or if they wanted to call it some other type of disease and not actually catch it and call it for what it is, if it's misdiagnosed, as several different types of medicines were given and none of it was effective. So, going from that, I'm not getting this video out in time. I was wondering whether or not there's anything else that could potentially cause a zombie outbreak aside from that. Would a zombie outbreak require a prion-style disease, or is there another cause? Medications, chemicals, weather anomalies, anything else that could potentially cause it aside from some sort of biological infection, whether real or manufactured or whatever? Is there something else that could cause it? Defined as a widespread phenomenon causing neurological symptoms like aggression, confusion, mindless behavior, loss of higher cognition, or erratic movements, does not require a prion-style disease. The reason I'm asking that is typically whenever you bring this up, people immediately go prion disease because it manipulates the brain so heavily. I wanted to know if there was something else. Prions are resilient misfolding proteins. We covered that. Infectious agents like virus and parasites are also, well as non-infectious factors such as medications, chemicals, and environmental triggers, could theoretically spark similar outbreaks. Below are some alternatives. Okay, so we've got viruses, parasites, fungal and bacterial. Cordyceps, obviously that's one of them. A parasite like the parasite that cats carry, and viruses, we've already talked about that one, but are there other things? Medications, It's basically tranquilizers that could potentially cause it. It's mixed with fentanyl and heroin, earning the zombie drug. Now, the difference is whenever it comes to this, the only way this becomes a problem is if somehow or another this was built to affect a lot of people. I don't know whether or not you could do a spray version of this if it was a terrorist attack of some sort and they were to contaminate a water source or something like that. That could affect a whole host of places, assuming that was actually something that people were trying to do. Flaca, alpha, PvP, a synthetic stimulant causing hypothermia, paranoia, superhuman strength. Violent aggressions have been reported to they've been reported stripping naked and attacking others or self-harming. It was wave led to zombie outbreaks with erratic rage. Basically, okay, it's funny they call it alpha PvP. Are we talking about PCP? Is this like that? Basically, it's a drug. Desomorphine, a homemade opioid causing tissue death and gangrene, giving a decayed zombie-like form with confusion and lethargy. Prescription medications, high doses of stimulants. ADHD drugs like Adderall can cause zombie effects with emotional blunting and fatigue, while steroids and antipsychotics may trigger aggression or restless agitation. A mass contamination event, tainted pharmaceuticals could simulate an outbreak. Is that something that we think could actually potentially be here? Instead of this being some sort of an active outbreak virus, was this contamination? That's interesting because then there's no reason for your character to think that they would get infected if it was actually a contamination situation. Say, I don't know, some sort of drug company goes out of business, and this is weird speculation way out in left field. Put that tinfoil hat on us. Say a pharmaceutical company goes out of business and there's some sketchy people involved and they don't want to, I don't know, destroy the stuff that they were supposed to destroy legitimately. They just want to bury it. They just take it out in their backyard, put it in containers that leak, and bury it. And somehow or another, a few months later on, they decide to bulldoze the area and put a community there. And after a couple of years, the community builds up really big and it turns into a city. And before long, they're drilling, they're putting in sewer lines, they're putting through pipes, there's wells being dug, and all sorts of stuff. And what everybody doesn't know is the water is contaminated with whatever chemical mess that this pharmaceutical company has put into the ground that they didn't destroy properly. Is it possible that maybe during the drilling for public water systems or something like that, or maybe they just dumped them in a river? I don't know how potent any of this stuff would be, but maybe if it builds up in the body over time, it becomes an issue, but that wouldn't necessarily spread across the US. According to the paper that we were seeing, this was a widespread thing. What is something else that could potentially do a widespread thing that would still only affect people who encountered it, maybe? Okay, way out in left field, cloud seeding. I know that in the news reports, now you're going to think I'm crazy, obviously. Cloud seeding is a thing. It's in the news. Companies brag about it. It's a thing that they can do now. We get constant reports of drought here, flood here, and all these companies, yes, we cloud seeded over here, but we are not responsible for this thing. It obviously wasn't us. What if, just what ifing, for those of you who follow me during the winter times on my gardening channel, you'll know that I what if a lot of things. What if there was, I don't know, a widespread contamination of whatever it is that created a cloud? Say, for instance, you know, we've got acid rain occasionally that happens. You would figure by now our skin would be falling off because I was always led to believe when I was a child with the way our environment was going that acid rain was just going to be everywhere all the time. So what happens if there's some sort of uptake of all of these chemicals somehow? Say, I don't know, it goes across San Francisco, and for some reason there's just like this big uptake of moisture and meds are involved. And then it just rains this down in several different areas, and people assume it is a zombie outbreak because how people are actually acting resembles a zombie, and where you've been so prone to think zombie. They're aggressive. They're walking around like they're half out of it. They're attacking people. Zombie. But in actuality, they're not actually zombies. They are humans that have been fully drenched in whatever this chemical was. Does that track? I would only assume that if the people didn't die outright immediately, that they would have to, I don't know, either search out, some part of them searches out the same chemical again and again and again, because you would figure after they come out of it, they would just, well, that much chemical, you would figure they would just die. They would just lay down and die, because that much going through your system, anybody who's ever binged on caffeine to do a report or something knows that they have to sleep for an entire weekend afterwards. It just does not make sense that there is a way for this to happen. If it was one city, maybe. Or if it was created intentionally, that now we're going back to the Hagashi thing. If this medicine profile was put into a medication for one reason or another and sold as if it was a cure for something. The flu, maybe. Maybe it was just a normal everyday flu that was hyped up as really, really bad for some reason. And this mixture of medicine somehow or another got in there and created this. I'm still not sure how all of this medicine stays in their system and keeps them alive well after death. That's the part that doesn't track for me whenever it comes to medicines. Chemicals as the cause: heavy metals, mercury, pesticides, glyphosates, inhabit neurotransmitters causing seizures, confusion, and aggression. Tellune, I'm saying that wrong. It's in glues and paints. It leads to euphoria and dementia. Widespread exposure to crop dusting, mishap on a chemical spill, mimicking zombie, okay. Other toxins, cyanotoxins from algae blooms, exacerbated by pollution, causing neurological symptoms like disorientation, magnesium overexposure from welding. Okay. So far, I'm not seeing anything that would actually... They could potentially cause or trigger a zombie-like outbreak, but how on earth those zombies still exist doesn't make sense. Unless there is a biological way in which afterwards something is keeping it alive and moving. That's the only thing where this falls apart for me. Extreme weather, permafrost thawing, releasing the zombie virus for the pathogens, or not necessarily the zombie virus, just any sort of pathogen that existed before that our bodies no longer carry the immunities to, could have devastating effects, yeah. Heat waves and droughts, extreme heat causing hypothermia and delirium, floods and storms, spread like vectors of born... Oh, okay. But this is still disease, though. Yeah, so like West Nile virus causing encephalitis, or fungal spores after hurricanes. In summary, prions aren't essential virus drugs. Toxins, climate shifts offer a variety of alternatives for a zombie scenario. Prevention involves surveillance, regulation, and climate action to mitigate real risks like drug epidemics or emerging pathogens. I think the issue would be is what happens if a couple of these happen at the same time? And by that, I go back to, what if there was a flu? What if a cure was made and the cure is actually what brought people back and keeps them alive somehow or another? Like maybe it manipulated their DNA, maybe it reanimates in some way, almost like Resident Evil style reanimates. I'm not sure. But I think it would take a grouping of factors in order to make the zombie virus. And I don't think at this particular point the zombie virus exists still, or at least the combination of items that existed before no longer exists to create the zombie as it was. Whenever we're taking our medicines for our infections and stuff like that, we're just dealing with scratches on our arms that have turned red and itch. We're dealing with a cut from a zombie, but I think that while the zombies are obviously like, I don't know, flesh-eating disease bags of whatever, you would not want to not treat an infection caused by a zombie because they are basically just rotting corpses walking around. You would definitely want to treat that, but I don't think at any point our character is going to come back as a zombie anymore. I don't think the circumstances that created them still exist in the world, or at least not where we're at right now. It should be interesting once the storyline comes out to find out whether or not any of the factions actually have control over any of the situations that caused the zombie virus to begin with. And I just realized half this time I've been leaning out of my screen. Actually, this whole time I've been leaning out of my screen. I do apologize. I'm not doing so well today, but I'm recording regardless. This is a fascinating subject. I have watched a lot of videos over it, watched a ton of movies over it, and in every single time you see people die and come back as a zombie. In this case, in this one zombie game, at no point will your character come back as a zombie. As of 2025. Will there be eventually an update where your character comes back? Will we find out that either... Oh, that would be messed up. That'd be a twist. That'd be such a twist. We all know that the casino man that we're, the Duke. The Duke is supposed to be the bad guy, or at least we've been led to believe that he's the bad guy, but Hugh, the one person who saw and patented things and tried to prepare people for the apocalypse that we know of, is not on the side of the traitors, the White River people. He's not on their side. He doesn't necessarily say he's on the Duke's side, but he's not on their side. What happens if we find out the White River people think that this cure is actually what caused it, and they're trying to find a way to spread it again? Oh. Oh. If we find out that it is actually the case that the Duke is a bad guy, but he's actually the one trying to stand in the way of these do-gooders that have found and are trying to distribute what they think is the cure, but is actually the cause of it, that could be the reason why there's this big gray zone and why things aren't exactly the way we think they're going to turn out. I don't know. I'm spitballing here, and I am definitely wearing a tinfoil hat when I do these videos, but I would love to hear what you guys think. Do you think we're actually suffering from do you think we're suffering from the zombie virus whenever our character gets bit? Is it just something that they conveniently leave out for, ease sake? Or is this actually lure that we're finding out by not finding out something, by not seeing something, our character not rezzing, as it were, as a zombie? Does this indeed tell us that the virus no longer exists? Or maybe it was never a virus to begin with. Maybe it was, in fact, a flu, and whatever was given to these people is what actually reanimated them. Has nothing to do with a virus that reanimated them. Something else did. I will see you guys in the comment section. Y'all have a wonderful day. I do apologize that this video came out of order, and I would love to have done a whole lot more research. I'm just not feeling very well today, but I wanted to make sure I got at least a video out, and I have been thinking about this one for a while. I will see y'all next time. You have a wonderful day, and you stay shiny. Bye.